Everyone has their favorite theory about why the hell Robert Downey Jr. is playing Dr. Doom. I myself have made a few. But there's one theory that checks every single box. It explains why the Russo brothers and Kevin Feige said that RDJ was the only actor that could play Victor Von Doom. It explains why Dr. Doom needs to look like Tony Stark, and it reveals the truth behind Kevin Feige and the Russos' loose plan for a Downey Doom all those years ago when they were making Avengers Endgame. And it all comes down to a can of sauerkraut. Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Colton Ogburn, and contrary to popular belief, RDJ's casting as Dr. Doom wasn't just some last-minute Hail Mary for Marvel. It was a plan that Kevin Feige had been kicking around for a while, going back as far as the Tim Story Fantastic Four films, and Feige and the Russos began planting the seeds for this heel turn in the MCU's Infinity Saga. So let me explain the Tony Stark adoption theory, how it works, and why it is the best way to have RDJ play Dr. Doom, be a variant with Tony Stark, and still be the Victor Von Doom we know and love from the comics. So, in Avengers Endgame, during the time heist, after Loki escapes with the Tesseract, Tony and Steve travel back in time to 1970 for another crack at getting the Tesseract, as well as Pym particles to fuel their ride back home.
Back in the game.
Now, when at this military base, after Tony gets his hands on the Tesseract, he comes face to face with his father, Howard Stark.
Hey! Door's this way, pal.
The two take an elevator back to the surface, and on the ride up, Howard mentions that his wife is expecting.
My wife's expecting. And, too much time at the office.
Did you see that? Did you see that look of confusion? That look of something not adding up for our super genius? He seems very thrown off that his mother would be pregnant at this time. He even goes on to ask,
How far along is she? I don't know.
Now, yes, this could just be Tony, realizing, oh wow, I didn't even think about my mom being pregnant with me at this time. But to me, that face and the follow-up question, it just screams math ain't mathin' for his mother to be pregnant with Tony at this time. But here's the kicker that kind of temporarily threw a wrench into this theory. According to the MCU canon, Tony Stark was born May 29th, 1970. And this scene supposedly takes place on April 7th, 1970. So it actually lines up perfectly for Tony's mom to be pregnant with him at this time. Or does it? You see, here in old America, we like to do things a little different. We write our dates month, day, year. But pretty much everywhere else in the world, they write it day, month, year. And for Tony's quantum tunnel time machine, he may have calibrated the interface to have a chronological dating system. Day, month, year. Which would mean that when Cap and Tony traveled back to 04071970, they didn't travel back to April 7th, 1970. They actually traveled back to July 4th, 1970, which, funnily enough, is Cap's birthday. Yes, it's really his birthday. Anyway, them traveling back to July 4th, 1970, Independence Day, that would make so much sense. One, because Tony was so certain of when to travel back to. He even says before they go,
I know for a fact they were there.
Who's they? What are we doing?
How I know.
Now, it's been revealed from a draft of the Endgame script that there was a scene that was never actually filmed, which included Tony looking at a framed picture, a staff picture, at the base that featured both Howard Stark and Hank Pym, and included the date at the bottom of the photo, and that is why Tony picked that date to travel back to. Reason being was that this confirmed for Tony that yes, Hank Pym was working at the base at that time, and that Tony's father was working at the base at that time, thus confirming that the Tesseract was at the base at that time because Howard worked on the Tesseract project. So the question then becomes, why would there be this random photo of Howard and Hank taken that day at the base? Well, it is a military base, so they probably had some kind of mandatory attendance luncheon where a photo was made of the staff. And it being July 4th could also explain why, one, Howard has flowers and an apology for working even on a holiday.
And, Too much time at the office.
And why he has this can of sauerkraut per request of his wife. Sauerkraut being a very popular topping of choice for hot dogs, which is a common food for the 4th of July celebrations.
You look like the 4th of July. It makes me want a hot dog real bad.
Okay, so assuming that it is the 4th of July, 1970, that would mean that Tony's confused face is coming from the fact that he should have already been born and at this time be about a month old. So he is perplexed as to why his mother would be pregnant right now. And here's where we can get into some comic precedent for this theory. Tony Stark in the comics was adopted.
Wait, what?
So perhaps in the MCU, this child that Maria Stark is pregnant with is not Tony Stark, and she would either tragically lose her baby to a miscarriage or a stillbirth, or, like in the comics, given birth to their first son, Arno Stark, who had serious birth defects and was kept a secret by Howard. And in the MCU, Howard may have even kept the child a secret from Maria, having told her that the child died, but really he was just hiding him away because he was embarrassed of the deformed child, and we know that Howard Stark was a very prideful guy. And being the powerful and wealthy guy he is, and scared of any embarrassment or appearance of failure, he opted to adopt a newborn from a foreign country, named him Tony Stark, and claimed him as he and Maria's biological child. And yes, there is comic precedent for this. In the comics, we have learned that Tony Stark was indeed adopted, but where the MCU could take this ball and run with it is by having this foreign country that they adopted the baby from be, you guessed it, Latveria, the home country of Victor Von Doom.
But I didn't think Latveria was in the MCU.
Good catch, buddy. And I think that's because in this timeline, where the baby, who was destined to grow up as Victor Von Doom, was instead adopted and grew up in the States as Tony Stark, that change of events led to the country of Latveria never forming and remaining under its original name and regime, Sokovia, home to the Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, and the place that would haunt Tony Stark for years to come. Not only following the destruction of the country in Age of Ultron, which he felt very responsible for, but also the Stark bombs that we saw in WandaVision, which were used in the war-torn country years prior. This would make it all the more poetic that when Howard Stark plucked Tony, or Victor, from his original place and time, that his bombs would then go on to ravage the country that, in another timeline, he would have liberated and become the king of. So, Howard and Tony are a lot alike, and sure, that can be chalked up to genetics, like father, like son, but I think a key reason that Tony is so much like his father is not only because his father raised him, and the way you're raised can have a massive effect on the personality and the essence that you develop, but I think Howard also experimented on Tony, or Victor, from a young age. Howard says right here in this recording to Tony,
"What is and always will be my greatest creation is you."
I wouldn't put it past Howard at all to have used his big brain to genetically alter his adopted son to make him a part of him, altering his genetics to have traits of his adoptive father. We know Howard was very involved in the development of the super soldier serum, giving soldiers super strength and agility by altering their genetics. So Howard could have given his son an equivalent, but for the mind. And again, there is comic precedent for this. In the comics, Howard experimented on his other son, his secret son that we mentioned earlier, Arno. So Howard likely did the same to Tony, crafting him to be the exact version of a son and replicant of himself that every headstrong father wants, thus twisting the mind of who would have been Victor Von Doom into the Tony that we know. This could add a whole new meaning to Howard saying that Tony was his greatest creation, and it could add a whole new layer to why Howard was so hard on Tony and often acted disappointed at him for not turning out exactly how he wanted him to. Howard expected so much of Tony because Howard designed him with certain expectations. Okay, so that's the basics of the theory, right? In an alternate timeline, this guy that we know as Tony was never adopted. He remained Victor Von Doom. He became the villainous Dr. Doom and King of Latveria. He was no longer shackled to the science-only mentality that in this other timeline where he was adopted by the Starks was forced upon him. And with that not being the case and him being over in Latveria, he was able to embrace the mystic arts and become a sorcerer. That, in addition to his mutual admiration for iron suits and technology, thus created Dr. Doom. And like his variant self Tony, Victor would still will go on to discover time travel just like in the comics. And this is what can lay the groundwork for this interventionist, preventionist, my way or the highway, suit of armor around the world, Tony Doom guy to come in and try to conquer the multiverse in Doomsday. But what if it actually goes deeper than that? What if we don't just see some variant show up through a portal from another timeline or universe, but instead we see this variant take on the body of our scarred and mangled Tony Stark body from Endgame via dreamwalking?
A dreamwalking sorcerer projects their own consciousness from their universe into another.
The Russos have specifically stated that Tony's snap at the end of Endgame is directly connected to Dr. Doom and RDJ having to play him. And I think that's because in the moment that Tony snapped his fingers, the alternate timeline where he was Victor Von Doom became a reality. And even more than this theoretical Schrodinger's box scenario. Let me explain. In a deleted scene after Tony snaps, we see him go to the Soul World, just like Thanos did in Infinity War after he snapped.
I think I might have made a bad decision. I'm scared I made a mistake.
Okay, so keep that in mind, and keep in mind the fact that Tony Stark briefly did become the single most powerful being in the entire universe while he had those 6 Infinity Stones in his possession. And like Thanos says in Infinity War, Tony became burdened with knowledge, even more knowledge than before.
You're not the only one cursed with knowledge.
So earlier in Endgame, when Loki escapes with the Tesseract, everything we see Loki do from that moment forward in the 2 seasons of his show, that happens essentially outside of time, and it took effect immediately. So for that second half of Endgame, it is Loki who is on the throne at the end of time, and variant timelines are now allowed to exist, unlike when under the rule of He Who Remains, who, sidebar, I think orchestrated this entire Tony adoption storyline. So this predetermined path for Tony Stark, it was no longer etched in stone. Victor Von Doom could now exist. But I think, and stick with me because it's about to get good, I think that when Tony became essentially briefly omnipotent, the Victor Von Doom, whose reality never got to exist, or that did exist but was pruned away as if it never existed, that Victor Von Doom, his soul, his essence, whatever you want to call it, his astral form that has been in limbo ever since He Who Remains wrote him out of existence, that Doom felt the snap from beyond, and his astral form, which as a master of the mystic arts, he would have been able to separate himself from his physical body into his astral form, perhaps right before his universe was pruned, thus making him the only survivor. Anyway, what if that astral form has been in limbo all this time, following the destruction of his universe, and now he has spotted a new vessel, a dead body of a variant of himself that he can now enter as his new physical form, just like Doctor Strange did with a dead body of one of his variants in Multiverse of Madness. This would mean that our Tony Stark, he is in fact dead. His soul has moved on. But now, in his body, the same body that has that scarred face from the snap, a scarred face very reminiscent of the one that Doom has from the comics, this variant soul, this variant astral form of Doom from that destroyed timeline that never got to be, he is now at the wheel. And with his memories of this universe or timeline that technically never existed, he is on a warpath to fix the multiverse and restore that timeline and the life that he was robbed from, save his mother's soul, just like in the comics, and it was probably Howard Stark who killed his mother and stole him away as a baby in the first place. So this not only gives us an epic and tragic Doctor Doom that is super true to the Doom that we know from the comics, but it also perfectly explains why he needs to be played by RDJ, and it perfectly encompasses the entire theme of this multiverse saga and the war between realities that is to come in Doomsday and Secret Wars. Now, to those of you who are skeptical about this whole adoption theory, because at the time that they made Endgame, you think that they didn't have this plan for RDJ being Doom, to that I say,
you are wrong.
Kevin Feige has liked this idea of Robert Downey Jr. playing Dr. Doom before even the MCU existed and before those first Tim Story Fantastic Four films were even made. Robert Downey Jr. came this close to being those movies movie's Doctor Doom. And in an interview with the Russo brothers, Joe Russo revealed that Feige's idea to bring Downey back as Doom, that was a conversation that they had, quote, a while ago. So while yes, Avengers Doomsday was originally the Kang Dynasty, and it wasn't going to have this big focus on Doctor Doom, I do think, however, that Avengers Secret Wars was always going to have RDJ come in as Doom, Doom being a huge part of both versions of Secret Wars in the comics, and I just don't think you'd do Secret Wars without Doom. So while announcing RDJ as Doom this early and bringing him in a film early was certainly in response to the big pivot away from Kang, I think there's enough evidence to indicate that there was always this loose plan to bring RDJ in as Doom, just not this quickly. But hey, those are just my thoughts and theories. I would absolutely love to hear yours down in the comments below. If you're new here, be sure to subscribe, hit the bell so you get notified every time we upload a new video. For ScreenCrush, I'm Colton Ogburn.